They say a simple invitation can change the course of everything. I thought it was just coffee, just a casual chat, just an ordinary afternoon. But the words he spoke that day still linger in my mind. I wasn't prepared for how deeply seen I would feel, or for the emotions that quietly rose after years of routine. But before I take you there, tell me, from where are you watching this story today? Drop your city in the comments. I'd love to know where our friends of Tin Hieu Vanochmat are joining from. And don't forget, if you enjoy stories like this, hit that subscribe button so we can soon reach 500 wonderful subscribers together. Now, let me take you back. I was in the garden pulling weeds from the flower bed, where my phone buzzed inside the pocket of my cardigan. The sun was gentle that afternoon, brushing the tops of the hedges, the whole neighborhood wrapped in its usual calm. I slipped off my gloves, wiped the dirt from my hands, and pulled out the phone. A short message lit up the screen. Coffee if you're free. Just a quick break. David. David was my husband's colleague. They had worked together for years at the firm. I'd seen him at company picnics, retirement dinners, the occasional holiday party. He was polite, always respectful, a little reserved, but warm in his quiet way. I had never thought much beyond those polite exchanges. Until that day, I lingered on the message, longer than I should have. Just last week at the annual fundraiser, we had spoken for the first time in more than passing greetings. That noisy night with half-empty glasses of wine and speeches no one really listened to. I had been standing alone near the dessert table when David walked up beside me. "You always look like you don't want to be here," he said with a half-smile. I laughed because it was true. And in that moment, his quiet charm felt different. We spoke for 10 minutes about art, about how he had taken up painting again after 20 years. He asked me questions, and more than that, he listened. I hadn't realized how much I missed being heard until then. And now this message. Coffee. I told myself it was innocent. Just coffee. I had no plans for the afternoon anyway. And maybe I wanted the break. So I changed into a fresh blouse, brushed my hair with more care than usual, and told myself once again, it's only coffee. Nothing more. The cafe near the lake was small, cozy, filled with mismatched chairs and local art on the walls. He was already there when I arrived, 2 cappuccinos, waiting on the table. He stood up the moment he saw me. And when our eyes met, I noticed again, his gaze was kind, grounding, like he saw more than most people cared to. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said as I sat down. Honestly, I smiled. I wasn't sure either. We talked about everything and nothing. The neighborhood, favorite places to travel, how time changes us in ways too quiet to notice until someone else points it out. His voice was calm, steady, not flirtatious, not bold but sincere. At one point, his fingers circled the rim of his cup. I always wondered what you really thought of all those corporate parties. You looked like your mind was somewhere else. I laughed softly. That obvious. Not obvious, he said, watching me. Just different. You always seemed more thoughtful than most people in the room. His words caught me off guard. Not flattery, not wrapped in charm, just honest. And in that honesty, something inside me shifted. We were both in our 60s, both married, both carrying years of knowing what should and shouldn't be said. Yet in that quiet cafe, the air felt different, like a confession suspended between us. Do you ever think about the things you didn't say he asked? The choices you didn't make? Not regrets, just possibilities. And in that moment, I felt seen in a way I hadn't for years. The cafe grew quieter as the afternoon slipped away. Sunlight shifted across the wooden floor. People came and went. But we lingered, two souls, reluctant to let a fragile moment end. When I finally stood to leave, David reached out. Just the lightest touch on my arm, almost like a question. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice low, steady. "This meant more than you know." I nodded, but inside, something stirred awake. Something I thought had been silent for years. I carried the weight of his words all the way back to my car, and even further, all the way home. I didn't tell my husband about the coffee. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I couldn't explain it. How do you describe a conversation that broke no rules, yet opened a door inside you you didn't even know was still locked? That evening, we sat together on the porch, sipping our usual chamomile tea. My husband spoke about his day, about the client meeting that had run late, about how David stayed behind to help with the numbers. I listened, nodded, smiled, pretending I didn't already know, pretending I hadn't spent an hour sharing something quiet and intimate with the same man just that afternoon. As he talked, I realized how well I knew him. Every sigh, every pause, every gesture memorized after decades together. He hadn't changed much, not outwardly. But somewhere along the way, our conversations had shifted. They had become shallow pools instead of rivers. Functional, necessary, safe. And yet all I could think about was that touch on my arm. Not the contact itself, but what it carried. The unspoken acknowledgement, the feeling of being seen again. How could something so small linger for so long? Days passed in a haze. I kept busy gardening errands, my book club, where none of us had actually finished the book. But beneath it all, there was a quiet echo, humming softly inside me. Then another message. Stopping by the gallery today. Thought of you. You once said you loved watercolor. No invitation, no pressure, just a thought offered like a thread. I stared at the screen for a full minute before replying. Which gallery? He sent the name of a small local space downtown. A place I had passed many times, but never entered. One of those someday things that always get postponed. That afternoon, I told my husband I was going to see a new exhibit. He nodded absently from behind his laptop. "Have fun," he said, barely looking up. And the strange thing was, I did. I felt no guilt, only a quiet anticipation I hadn't felt in years. The gallery was cool and filled with light. And there was David near the back, standing before a watercolor that looked like sunlight spilling across paper. He turned, smiled that same gentle smile that made everything feel unhurried. "I thought you'd like this one," he said, motioning toward it. I stood beside him, letting the colors seep in. Pale yellows, bleeding into soft oranges, blues, dissolving into nothingness. "It reminds me of early mornings," I whispered. "Before anyone's awake, when the sky is just beginning to choose a color." His eyes softened. "Exactly." We wandered together in silence, pointing out pieces we liked, but mostly just walking side by side in that suspended space between reality and imagination. At one painting, a single empty chair beneath the window, he spoke again. "Do you ever feel like you disappeared somewhere along the way?" The words were so gentle, I almost missed them. But they struck deep. I looked at the chair, at the sunlight spilling across the floor, at the space, waiting for no one. I admitted quietly. Sometimes I still do. He didn't respond with words, just a look. Not pity, not admiration. Something in between. Something that said, "I see you too." Afterward, we sat outside the gallery on a bench beneath the shade of a maple tree. The breeze was soft, the air warm. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The silence between us began to feel like its own quiet language. Eventually, I glanced at the time. "I should go," I said softly. "I promised I'd be home before dinner." David nodded. "Of course." Then he hesitated. "I hope you don't feel uncomfortable about this, about us talking." I turned to him, met his gaze. "No," I said, honestly, and I meant it, because I didn't feel uncomfortable. There was no scandal, no betrayal, just two people seasoned by life, quietly aching, who had stumbled upon an unexpected connection in the stillness of their days. We stood. He walked me to my car, and just before I got in, he said, "You know, it's not often someone makes you feel like you matter." Not really. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply nodded. But as I drove home, I thought of that chair beneath the gallery window, the one bathed in light and emptiness. And I wondered how many of us are just waiting for someone to notice the sunlight at our feet. That night after dinner, I stood at the sink, washing the same dishes I had washed 1,000 times before. The warm water ran over my hands, plates clinked, the television hummed from the living room, where my husband sat. Everything was familiar, predictable, safe, and yet I couldn't stop thinking about that bench outside the gallery, about the way David's words had settled into my skin, like a warmth I hadn't realized I'd missed. I didn't feel guilty, and that surprised me, because it wasn't an affair, not even a dangerous flirtation. It was simply recognition. The next morning, I pulled open the drawer of my nightstand and found something I hadn't touched in years. My old sketch pad. I used to draw before the children, before the endless laundry and routines took over. I used to sketch the bowl of fruit on the table, the shape of tree shadows, even my husband's hand as he read the morning paper. It had been years. But I flipped past the faded pencil strokes until I found a blank page. And I began to draw. At first, just the chair from the gallery. But then I added a second chair slightly turned toward the first. A conversation in posture, not in words. Something had changed. Not just in me, but around me, or maybe I was finally noticing what had always been there. A week passed. David and I didn't speak. No messages, no invitations, just silence. And still I missed him. That shocked me most of all. Not because I longed for excitement, but because I realized how deeply I craved being understood. It wasn't that my husband didn't love me. He did in his way. Our life was built on decades of loyalty, shared responsibilities, the rhythm of familiarity. But somewhere along the years, we had stopped asking each other the deeper questions, stopped truly seeing. Then came Saturday, another company function, a rented banquet hall, polite laughter, dry chicken. I wore a navy blue dress I hadn't touched in years. Standing at the back, sipping flat champagne, I felt a presence behind me. "I didn't expect to see you tonight," a voice said. I turned. David stood there, simply dressed in a charcoal suit, his eyes calm yet sharp. "I came with Richard," I said lightly. "He wanted to make an appearance." David nodded. "I'm glad you did." We stood in the corner, unnoticed among the chatter. The noise of the room gave us privacy. "You've been quiet," he said. "So have you." I didn't want to cross any lines. "There aren't lines," I answered softly. "Not unless we draw them." He nodded, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned just slightly closer. Not enough to alarm, just enough for his voice to reach only me. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "When was the last time someone asked how you really are?" I froze. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was devastatingly honest. I don't know," I whispered. "Maybe no one ever has." He stepped back as if giving me space. We didn't say much after that. The rest of the night blurred into clinking glasses and meaningless small talk. But his question stayed like a thread wrapped around my chest. Later at home, brushing my hair before the mirror, I looked at myself differently. Not with regret, not with criticism, but with curiosity. Who was I now after all these years of being a wife, a mother, a hostess, a listener? Who was I to myself? David hadn't made a move. He hadn't flirted. He didn't need to. What he offered wasn't romance. It was space. A mirror. A question I hadn't known I was longing to be asked. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to the drawing, the two chairs angled toward one another, and I wondered what I would say if someone truly asked me, "How are you?" Not fine, not busy, not tired. But the truth, and the truth was this. I felt alive, nervous, seen. Something inside me had shifted not toward another person, but toward myself. And I wasn't ready to let that go. The next morning, the house was quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. My husband slept beside me, his breathing steady, his profile as familiar as the back of my own hand. Peaceful, unburdened. But me, I was anything but. I poured my coffee in the same old mug, sat in the same chair by the window. And yet, everything felt smaller, like the space no longer fit who I was becoming. David didn't message that day. I didn't expect him to. But he lingered in my thoughts, not as longing, not as forbidden desire, but as awakening. A gentle nudge from the life I'd been sleepwalking through. Later that week, I saw him again. The farmer's market. I was reaching for pears when I heard his voice. "You always pick the ones with spots." I turned, and there he was. Calm, familiar. As if we'd both known this moment would come. "They're sweeter," I said, holding one up with a smile. "I figured you'd say that." We walked the aisles together, talking about recipes, prices, the weather, ordinary things. But beneath it, all the weight of unfinished conversations hovered quietly between us. Near a booth of handmade pottery, David picked up a bowl with a small chip in its rim. "I always like the imperfect ones," Pesty said. I looked at him and, for the first time, allowed myself to speak the truth. I'm not unhappy. But I think I've been lonely in a way I couldn't name. His gaze met mine. "I know exactly what you mean. There was no plan, no reckless decision, just truth." And in that moment, it felt like the most honest thing I had shared in years. I bought the chipped bowl and placed it on the kitchen shelf at home. My husband never asked about it, never noticed the new shape in our old space. But I noticed, and it reminded me not of David, but of myself. The part of me I had silenced beneath duty and routine. Over the following weeks, small changes began. I joined an art class. I set boundaries I hadn't before. I opened conversations with my husband that didn't begin with, "What's for dinner?" And no, I never told him about the coffee or the gallery or the market, because this story was never really about David. It was about the way he saw me. Not as a wife, not as a role, not as a routine, but simply as me. He didn't fix my marriage. He didn't break it either. What he gave me was a reflection of something I'd forgotten I was still here. And that was the point. Sometimes the most powerful moments in life aren't the explosions. They're the gentle shifts, the quiet awakenings that change the way you see yourself forever. So when people ask, "Did anything happen between you two?" I say yes. Something did happen. I came back to myself, and for that, I'll always be grateful. Have you ever had a moment like that, a time when someone reminded you that you were still yourself? Share in the comments. I'd love to read your story. And don't forget to subscribe to the Love and Tears channel to reach the milestone of 500 companions together.